In 2015, as UN Assistant Secretary General for Climate Change, I was part of the remarkable moment when the world came together at Paris and committed to limiting global warming to well under 2 degrees. It was a profound achievement which showed the world what multilateral diplomacy can achieve when backed by political will. 5 years on, at today's Climate Ambition Summit, world leaders are being asked to summon that political will again to implement the provisions of the Paris Agreement and in particular to increase their mitigation ambition by doing more and more quickly. It is critical they do so. Even amidst the global pandemic, carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere are still rising. The world is still far off track to make the promises of Paris a reality. Earlier this month, the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, said this chilling conclusion: the state of the planet is broken. On the current trajectory, we're still headed to temperature rise of over 3 degrees, which would be devastating for people around the world. Even worse, we're learning how, if we go beyond 2-degree global warming, we risk triggering a cascade of effects that could irretrievably shift our planet to a hothouse Earth scenario. This is why many now think it is time to declare a planetary emergency. There's some good news. A growing number of countries have committed to net zero emissions by around 2050, a critical goalpost to achieve the Paris goals. We see societies and businesses around the world acknowledging the emergency and seeking ways to address it, including the international youth-led Fridays for Future movement and the fast-growing Race to Zero campaign. But it is still not enough. Analysts say that even if all the net zero pledges made so far are met, warming by 2100 would be at least 2.1 degrees centigrade, and many countries are simply not taking the near-term action necessary to achieve those pledges. The state of this emergency has become such that in addition to the urgent emission cuts, additional approaches are now needed. According to the IPCC, all pathways that limit global warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade project removing billions of tons of carbon dioxide already in the atmosphere. That work needs to start happening now, as the longer it takes to end CO2 emissions, the more removal will be needed. Understanding and addressing the relationship between emission reductions and carbon removal and finding the appropriate balance is a governance challenge by itself. There are many ideas about how to remove carbon, some nature-based, many requiring new technology, but none are ready at scale, and we do not have the governance frameworks in place to achieve this in a fair and sustainable way. In case neither emission reductions nor removals prove enough, there are also growing calls to consider the feasibility of additional measures, such as ideas to reflect sunlight back into space to directly cool the planet. These additional approaches could have profound impacts, positive and negative, on the Sustainable Development Goals. To take the right decisions about them, we need to start building inclusive governance frameworks, and we need to start that process now. That is why, 5 years on from Paris, I believe it is time to take the next steps. First, of course, the world must much more urgently cut emissions. Over the coming months, leaders must put the world on an irreversible course to decarbonization. But emission reductions alone will not be sufficient to reach the 1.5C goal. So second, the time has come for world leaders to urgently address the need for large-scale carbon dioxide removal. They need to do this to remove any emissions that remain by around 2050, and then to remove more carbon dioxide than the world emits in the second half of the century. This is a huge undertaking. Whether nature-based or technology-based, it will need technology, know-how, and global monitoring, reporting, and verification. It will need massive finance commitments, and it will need much more understanding about complex linkages with the Sustainable Development Goals. Third, given the risk that these actions won't come at speed and scale needed, the time has come to learn much more about whether solar radiation modification is feasible and if it could ever be an option. This is no easy matter. Taking decisions about solar radiation modification is linked to many other issues, including cutting and removing carbon dioxide emissions, adaptation, resilience, and efforts to achieve all the Sustainable Development Goals and what may follow them. Getting these decisions right requires a lot more research and the creation of global governance frameworks to address the risks. But in a planetary emergency, we no longer have the luxury to ignore additional approaches to reduce risk. It is time to learn more and to build frameworks to govern them, whether or not we decide to adopt them. So let's work together to meet this challenge. Let's bring together governments, civil society, and the private sector now to tackle the carbon dioxide removal challenge. Let's work with our leaders to get everyone on board to recognize and deal with our planetary emergency. We're just about, but only just, in a position where we can still avoid catastrophic warming. So let's not lose any more time. Thank you.